Hello everyone, my name is Billy and welcome to my presentation for Unit 7 assignment of our ethics course. Today I will be exploring prostitution as a moral dilemma through the lens of Kantian deontology, a moral theory rooted in duty, rationality, and respect for human dignity. Today's presentation builds up from last week's discussion forum with some enhancements as recommended by one of my peers. So this presentation will cover the basics of deontology. We will introduce you to Immanuel Kant and his key ideas and explain the three formulations of the categorical imperative. We'll then apply these principles to our real-world scenario, prostitution, particularly cases where women are driven into it by poverty, trauma, or social pressure. Finally, I'll share some ethical reflections and wrap it up with a brief conclusion. So what is deontology? This is a moral theory that focuses on doing one's duty. Unlike utilitarianism, which judges actions by their outcomes, deontology asks, did you follow a moral rule? For instance, if a person lies to protect someone, deontology may still consider the action wrong because honesty is a moral duty. So in this theory, intentions matter more than consequences. Consider a case where someone has maybe stolen something and this is your friend and they run to your house and they're being pursued by the person who they stole from. So the intention of the person pursuing them is to take away his life. So do you say your friend is in your house or do you lie to protect their lives? So Immanuel Kant is an 18th century philosopher. He believed that moral laws should come from reason, not from feelings or external rewards. He proposed the categorical imperative, a principle that applies to everyone at all times, no matter the situation. To Kant, the moral worth of an action comes from doing it out of duty, not because it feels good or brings benefits. Kant gave us three formulations of the categorical imperative to test if an action is moral. The first one is universal law. The second one, humanity as an end. And the third and last, kingdom of ends. So the universal law asks us to act only on rules that you would want everyone to follow, right? Whereby the humanity as an end tell us to treat others as ends in themselves, never just as tools. And the kingdom of ends directs us to act as if our maxims shape the moral laws of a community. We'll now try to apply each of these to the topic of prostitution. So let's consider women who enter prostitution not out of choice, but due to poverty, abuse, or trauma. Some do it to feed their children, others may have been introduced to it as teenagers or manipulated by traffickers. Some may even use it to retaliate, such as a woman who, after being infected with HIV, chooses to spread the disease in anger. Each person has a reason, but the moral question is, do these reasons justify the action? Let's say the maxim is, it is acceptable to engage in prostitution as long as you are meeting your family needs. Now ask, what if everyone acted this way? The society will normalize treating the body as a commodity where intimacy and dignity are bought and sold. According to Kant, this leads to a contradiction in will. You cannot consistently will a world where this is universal, yet expect others to treat you with dignity. Therefore, prostitution will fail this particular test. And in humanity as an end, this principle demands that we treat others and ourselves as beings with inherent worth, not as tools. Let's look at both sides. If clients pay for sex purely for pleasure, they are reducing the sex worker to an object. If the sex worker provides the service only for money without any respect or connection, they may also be using the client as a means. So in both cases, the human dignity of at least one party is compromised. Kant will say this violates the duty to treat all humans as ends in themselves. Let's now look at kingdom of ends. Now imagine a moral duty made up of rational individuals who create and follow laws that respect one another. Will such a community legislate prostitution, especially when it stems from economic desperation or past trauma? Kant would argue no. A moral society must aim for justice, support, and mutual respect, not one where people must sell their bodies to survive. Thus, prostitution contradicts the moral standards of a kingdom of ends. Now, onto some ethical considerations. Here is where things get a bit complicated. Kantian ethics lacks emotional flexibility. It does not consider how desperate someone might be or how few options they have. Yet it pushes the society to do better. Kant doesn't just say prostitution is wrong. He implies it's the society's duty to create conditions where no one has to choose this path. So instead of judging the individuals, Kantian ethics calls us to reform the systems that fail them. So back to a real world example, now touching on universal law. So this case is of a married woman who offers sexual favor for 10,000 shillings. This case is real. A married woman facing financial hardship considered offering a sexual favor for 10,000 shillings. She didn't see herself as a sex worker, but the act shows how desperation can blur ethical boundaries. Kent would ask, what if everyone did this? If we normalize survival-based sex, we begin to erode the inherent dignity of people. That's why he'd say this maxim cannot be universalized. So, some personal reflection to human as an end. This part actually hits home for me. I've met someone going through this, and it's hard to judge them, to judge when survival is at stake. But Kant reminds us we are not supposed to use others or ourselves merely as tools to an end. It made me ask, how do we uphold dignity, not just for others, but for ourselves? His principle challenges us to respond with compassion and justice. Right. This is the most visionary of Kant's formulations. I think a kingdom of ends is a society where everyone is treated with dignity and no one needs to compromise it to survive. That means we have to go beyond judging individuals. We must transform systems, create economic safety nets, trauma-informed support, and laws that don't criminalize the vulnerable. So to wrap up this conversation, Kantian deontology teaches us to act from moral duty, not just for results. Prostitution, when examined under all three formulations of the categorical imperative, is morally impermissible. However, the blame doesn't fall solely on the women involved. It falls on us, on our institutions, and on the societal structures that fail to protect and uplift them. Kant reminds us that every human being matters, not as a tool, not as a statistic, but as an end in themselves. This presentation drew heavily from Marcuse and Hendrick's Introduction to Philosophy, Ethics, and Kant's groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. Thank you for listening, and I welcome your questions and reflections.